It looks like the coronavirus has made it necessary for us to meet like this again, and we'll hope that that terrible disease doesn't strike any of us. That's my prayer. It's a frightening time. Um, I watch the news on television probably too much, but I get an idea of the kind of ways that this is affecting the life of our nation. And it's not a light thing. It's a terribly difficult circumstance. There was an ancient philosopher who once pointed out that it was impossible for a man to step in the same stream twice. What he meant by that was that when you tried to step in the same stream, that the stream itself had changed, and though it was a short length of time and there wasn't a lot of change, there was also change in the person. And then there was also change in the environment. The leaves on the trees weren't the same. The world had changed some. And so he said it was impossible for anybody to step into the same stream twice. I think I know what he meant, that we live in a world that changes. It's always in a state of flux. It's always changing. As I've gotten older, I've liked things to be the same. I've not been comfortable with change that has taken place, changes that have taken place in my body, changes that have taken place in the church, changes that have taken place in the lives of people that I've known. But change is an important, a never-ending part of our world. Change, I think we'd all say, change is not necessarily a bad thing. I've known people that were just too ornery to change in some areas where they needed change. And so change is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm glad that we live in a world where there are changes. I have to say that I'm rather fond of indoor toilets and water that comes on the sink whenever you turn it on. I never brush my teeth without thinking of my great-grandmother, who lived up in Fulton County, and who lived in a house that her husband had built largely, and some of her boys. But she never knew what inside running water was. There was a large living room and bedroom at the same time. People used to live with a lot less of the material comforts than we know of today. Change is not always a bad thing. I'm glad that we live in a world where there is change. But at the same time, I'm usually a bit leery, as maybe you are, of change. Even changes that hold a great deal of potential for good can turn out to be bad. For example, the Industrial Revolution has made it possible for us to have better ways of transportation and so forth. But at the same time, there's come a pollution to our atmosphere. One of the dangers of our time not only is the virus that we're talking about, but the global climate change is, I hear a lot about these days too. And so there's a lot of change where there is an inadvertent change in the background, a change that we aren't aware of. Rapid change, among other things, can have a psychological effect on us. It can increase our anxiety. More things make it possible for us to tolerate one another and get by. Broken homes result. Parents want to give their children more and more with everything that have to do with gadgets, and less that have to do with their time. And so there's a downside to even the good that comes from change. Some change, even if it benefits, just isn't worth the effort. I read an article once about that said, I don't know if it's true or not, but at least the article argued that there are more efficient ways to hold two pieces of paper together than by using what we normally call a paper clip. And a number of people have taken out all kinds of patents for discovery of some area like that. But as it turns out, there's some change. I'm reminded of a computer when I think of this, but there are some changes that are more troublesome than they are helpful, and so we sometimes we don't want to change just because. Pardon the dogs and the birds and everything that's around, drowning out my voice. Change is inevitable, but change can be disquieting too. This was on my mind as I read a passage in Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 6, beginning with verse 17, the Bible says, "In the same way God, desiring even more to show the heirs of the promise," that's you and me, Christian people, God desiring even more to show the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, intervened with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, two immutable things, the King James Version says, by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope that is set before us. This hope we have, the writer says, as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, one which enters within the veil. I don't suppose that any of us would want to argue that change is always a beneficial thing. I think that all of us would admit at times we are a little uncomfortable with the changes that take place in our world. But there is one source that we can all turn to that does not change, and that's the changelessness of God. It's a comfort to me as I look at the world, as I listen to the news programs and look at the world where I live. It's a comfort for me to know that the God who is watching over it all doesn't change. God selected in the Old Testament the city of Jerusalem. It was the place where his name was. He was worshipped in the temple there. But there were times that God became so angry with the people of Israel that he brought other nations against them. And sometimes there was change that took place in their world, change that came about because of their own rejection of God and their own disobedience to him. It seems to me that one of the things we should learn from the unsettled times that we live in is that the God that we worship does not change, and that he is sovereign over this world, and that sometimes he brings about things that we don't understand very well. Because God is the changeless one who transcends the generations, because God is the one who goes beyond the short span of human life, one of the consequences is that we can take refuge in him. At least that's what the Hebrew writer says. We look to God as the strength of our lives. Whether our lives end with some current scourge that is in our world, some disease that spreads from person to person, life is going to end for all of us. And our dependence on God, our seeking refuge in him, is the only thing that will get us through. I love that portion in the book of Exodus where Moses goes up with God into the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments on the 2 tablets of stone for a second time. And while he's up on the mountain, Moses sort of complains to God. I'm going to paraphrase. But if I read it right, what Moses says is, God, you've given me a great deal of responsibility. You've given me the responsibility of all this people, your people, the people that you chose, the people of Israel. And they've broken your law, and they've paid no attention to me. And I have a great deal of responsibility on my shoulders, which you've given me. But do you realize, God, it seems to me that Moses is saying this. Do you realize, God, that I have never seen you? I'd like to see you. And God says, all right, Moses, you can see me, but you can see me only from the backside. I'm going to put you into a cleft of the rock, and you'll be able to see out, and when I pass, you'll know that I've passed. There are times in the Bible where seeing God is spoken of, and I suppose it's always something on this order. I think that I have seen God. I think I've seen him in a windstorm. I think I've seen him from the top of a mountain. I think I've seen God in the coming of life into the world. I've seen God. I've seen at least his effects, what he's done, how he's made the world. But I've never really seen God like I've seen another person. I'd like to see him too, Moses. And so maybe a time is coming in our lives when the essence of God, when God will appear to us, I believe, when God will judge us, each one of us, as we stand before him. In the meantime, he's a refuge for our soul. He's a place where we can get in the cleft of the rock, where we can stand. I like Deuteronomy 32, verse 11. It's a passage of the Bible, or part of the Bible, that we often overlook. It's Moses' song right at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. He stopped talking to the people of Israel. The book of Deuteronomy is 3 speeches that Moses gives to the people of Israel while they're right on the brink of the land of Canaan. But at the end of Deuteronomy, there are these songs that Moses sings. And Moses says in chapter 32, verse 11, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, it hovers over its young. He spreads its wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. God is, Moses says, the rock in which we sought refuge. For the people of Israel, I think, for spiritual Israel, for the church, for Christian people, that it ought to be true that we find our refuge in him. And there are times that come along in our lives when, with all of our scientific advancement, all the things that we think we can do, we can have running water in the house and so forth, all the things that we can do, all of it sort of fades away as God shows his sovereign power over the world. David taunted Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, verse 40, by saying, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. I come to you in the name of the changeless one," David says, as he goes to fight Goliath. In 1 Samuel 2, verse 3, David says, "My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield, the horn of my salvation, my stronghold, my refuge." The word refuge is used over and over again as the characters of the Bible that we take as our spiritual examples. The characters of the Bible speak of God as the refuge where they hide themselves. Psalm 7, verse 1, "O Lord my God, in you I have taken refuge," the author says. "Save me from all those who pursue me and deliver me." I wonder, if I were to ask the question, do you ever feel like you need a refuge? I suppose that you would be like me. You would think that there are times when you need a place to hide, where it would be nice to have a cleft in the rock. Life can be sometimes a pretty scary proposition. When we're young, we wonder who we'll marry and whether he or she will be good for us. And we fret over the choice of a career. And as we grow older, we're anxious about providing for our family, maybe being a good parent. And all the while that we're doing this, disease and accident and disaster hovers around us. I don't suppose I have to tell you this. I think we all are aware of it. In the uncertain times of life, when we want to hide, when we're afraid, God is a refuge. for those who know him. There's a beautiful hymn entitled Immortal Love Forever Full. One of the verses goes like this: but warm, sweet, tender, even yet, a present help is he, and faith has still its Olivet, and love its Galilee. The events of the Bible don't speak just of things in the past. They speak to where we are and how we live. I can remember as a child in the country in Arkansas before my family moved to Michigan. We had some chickens, and occasionally a hawk would sort of sail over the area. And when they did, a hen that had some small chicks would start clucking. And the little chicks would run like a bolt of lightning to get under her wings. A little safety, a little protection. In Matthew 23, verse 37, Jesus said, how often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, in Matthew 23, verse 37. God is a refuge in any circumstance of life. But there's one matter in particular where we seek refuge. We lose people we love. Death makes its claims and leaves us alone. We live with a constant fear that we will make the same trek our fathers made. God is a refuge in time of any trouble that we have. It's a little wonder that we never tire of singing of God, our refuge. And how firm a foundation. One of the verses goes like this: even down to old age, all my people shall prove my sovereign, eternal, unchangeable love. And when hoary heads shall their temples adorn like lambs, they shall still in my bosom be born. God is a refuge because he is unchanging, because he is eternal. I hope that the lesson has said something to you today. There's more that I have in this, and I'll probably continue with it next week. But in the meantime, can we make God our refuge in this time of trouble? If you are like me, you feel some sense of fear and uncertainty in the times that we live in. But whatever uncertainty there may be, God is in charge of this world, and God is in charge of our lives. He is the sovereign of this world. And we will leave this world at some time, sooner or later we will leave. And when we do, we can hope to be with God through Jesus Christ, our Lord, who's died for us to be saved. I hope that those thoughts will give us some sustaining power in the week in front of us. And I look forward to the time when we can be together again.